Hello and welcome back to Reading Tintin, A Personal View. This is Sean, one half of Sean and Kira. And a quick note to say before we begin, consider hitting the like and or the subscribe button if you enjoy these videos or if you're interested in Tintin or Hergé. And if you are interested in comics, please check out our website, seanandkira.com, or our Patreon site, patreon.com/Sean and Kira, to see what we're doing these days. We are the co-creators of one graphic novel called Lucy in the Sky that is available from First Second, and our second graphic novel, Rhiannon, is coming out in this coming October, also from First Second. So if you're interested in what we do, please consider supporting us on Patreon. And so it's been a few weeks since I've done one of these. I took a little time off over the winter break. I'm a teacher, so I had a couple weeks off from school and wasn't really producing much during that time, but I'm trying to get back into a regular schedule again of putting up videos and art. So now we're at the land of Black Gold, which came out following the Seven Crystal Balls and Prisoners of the Sun. But it has a kind of a complicated history. It began its very first serialization in 1939, and it wasn't released in book form until 1950. So we'll get into all of that shortly. But first, let's take a look at the cover. So this is my English language copy here. This is the American edition that was published by Little Brown. I think I got this in the 80s. And it was one of the later volumes that I acquired as a teenager, I think. And so it wasn't one of the early ones that I read as a child. And I remember really being intrigued by this cover, and especially on the back, you know, they would feature these kind of like thumbnails of all the different covers that were available at the time. And so the ones I didn't have, I would look at them and I would really study them and try to figure out, you know, glean some information from them. And this one in particular, I always found very interesting. There's Herr Müller, who is the German villain, who's a recurring character. This is his second appearance in the Adventures of Tintin. He's introduced in the Black Island. And I don't think that I realized that was him until I actually bought the volume and read it. A little small illustration here. He really doesn't look, he looks a little different than he does in the Black Island. So I'm not sure if I actually realized that this was Müller. But there he is, and he's got this black stain all over him, and the red Jeep racing across the desert, and what looks like Thompson and Thompson from their walking sticks and their bowlers, but they've got this yellow sort of complexion and green hair and mustaches, and looks like bubbles coming out of them. And so it's a very intriguing cover, and you know, I really I wanted to know what was going on in the story. And aside from that, it's a really nice cover. You know, Hergé, when he started redrawing a lot of these and redoing the covers, he would really put a lot of work into the design. And here we have this really nice Middle Eastern design work here. kind of Islamic geometry and the arch, and even the Arabic script. He took the time to actually research and put in some Arabic script there. And in the French language edition, of course, the lettering is done to make it look like Arabic calligraphy. And even the title page, all this border calligraphy around here. It's interesting that the text sort of overlaps the border. I wonder what it's like in the French. Yeah, in the French language version, the Casterman is nicely placed above it. This here must have just been kind of, maybe they didn't catch that it sort of overlaps the calligraphy. Anyway, the nice frame here, again, the sort of Middle Eastern style with the oil wells in the background. Well, like I said, this volume has a complicated history. Not unlike the Seven Crystal Balls and the Prisoners of the Sun, which was interrupted halfway through being serialized and then had to be picked up again a few years later and finished. This one went through a similar thing, although a little bit more extreme case. So Hergé began serializing the story in 1939. So this was immediately following King Ottokar's scepter. And this was before the Germans had invaded Belgium, the very start of World War II. And the story originally, he was bringing in the villain from the Black Island, Herr Müller, Dr. Müller, and similar to the Black Island, where Müller was sort of part of a plot to disrupt the British economy with counterfeiting. In this one, he's part of a German plot to sabotage the oil producing capabilities of other nations. So again, it had a very anti-German tone to it. And Hergé was serializing this in Le Petit 21, which is where he was running Tintin before the Germans invaded Belgium. And then, of course, when they did, Belgium becomes occupied by the Nazis. The storyline was not one that he could continue doing, obviously, with a German villain. It was a little bit too much on the nose. And as I mentioned in one of the previous episodes, when the Germans invaded, they shut down Le Petit 21, and Hergé, he no longer had a place to run his Tintin comic strip. Eventually, he was able to start serializing Tintin again in Le Soir, and so a few of the volumes that came out following King Ottokar's scepter were serialized there before being collected into book form. But this is a story because of the anti-German, the German villain and the anti-German theme in the story. He really couldn't continue with it. So it sort of just sat unfinished for a number of years. And then after the war, he was given his own magazine. Tintin magazine was started, and the Tintin comic strip was restarted again, being serialized in that. And from Tintin magazine, we have the Seven Crystal Balls and Prisoners of the Sun. And so after finishing Prisoners of the Sun, Hergé decided that he was going to go back and have another go at this story. So this is now 1948. He picks up the story, and in the intervening years between the time that he discontinued it and the time that he picked it up again, a lot of changes had happened to Tintin's world. So Captain Haddock, for instance, and Professor Calculus were both introduced. They were now very important characters, and it would have been odd to leave them out of a Tintin story. So when he went back to redo the story, to redraw it, he had to figure out a way to insert them into the story. So they really don't have a major part in the story, but he was able to kind of insert them so that readers wouldn't feel it was odd that, whereas Captain Haddock or whereas Professor Calculus and Marlinspike as well. Marlinspike Hall is kind of a home base, although it doesn't really appear here. Tintin, the story starts with Tintin is still living in his flat. He hasn't really moved into Marlinspike yet, but as we'll see, we get little glimpses of Captain Haddock and Nestor and Professor Calculus. So that was one thing he had to do. He had to figure out a way to revamp the story to make it a little bit more palatable for readers of the late 40s, what they were used to seeing in their Tintin stories. So we start here. The theme is the same. Somebody is sabotaging oil production, and we start off with Thompson and Thompson. And I love this first scene. They pull into a gas station, and they tell the attendant that they'll take half a gallon after laying on the horn. He says, okay, I'm coming. Half a gallon. The attendant says, think it'll go in? And then they say, and you can save a few drops for my lighter. He says, as your lordship pleases. And off they go, laying on their horn still. Completely obnoxious, these two. And they're driving along singing, and they're singing a song that goes boom, boom, and their car explodes. So right off the bat, a really kind of a classic Thompson and Thompson mishap. And as they're waiting for the tow truck to come, they light up their cigarettes, and their lighter explodes. I've mentioned this before. The old the unbuttoned button-down collar that becomes unbuttoned when something like this happens is a classic kind of cliche in cartooning I love. So here we have Tintin in his flat, and he gets a call from Haddock. So we get one little appearance of Captain Haddock, kind of giving us an excuse why he won't be appearing in the story. He's been given orders. He's being mobilized and ordered to assume command of a merchant vessel. So, war is in the air. There's a sort of tense feeling. And so it's sort of, in a way, it kind of reflects the time that it was originally serialized during World War II. I see Nestor in the background. More cars exploding, and Tintin decides that he's going to investigate by interviewing the oil company executive and see if you can figure out what's going on with this exploding petrol. And meanwhile, Thompson and Thompson are off on their own investigation. They have deduced that the people who stand to gain the most from all of these explosions are is the tow truck company. So they decide that they're going to go undercover and work on a breakdown truck. So this is something here. So you can see, I always found this panel in particular interesting. It looks, just from the weight of the line and even the shape of the Thompsons' heads, this is clearly a panel that was drawn quite a while before the rest of this. So it might have been a panel that was untouched from the very first version of the comic. And as I said, when Hergé went to take up the story again and to begin re-serializing it in Tintin magazine, he went back to redraw a lot of the original version. And the one thing I didn't mention was that so this book then gets published in book form in 1950. It comes out in 1950. But that wasn't really the end of it either. So in 1971, they were getting ready to release the English language version of it. And Methuen, who is the British publisher of the English language version, in a move that was very similar to what they did with the Black Island, they believed that a lot of the story was just too outdated, the way it was, the way it stood, and they asked that Hergé do a big overhaul and redraw large chunks of the story. So we have another revision in 1971. So we have the artwork in this. You can sort of see the difference. These early pages, they look very much like something from the late 40s, his late 40s style. And then you get into the later pages, and we're getting up into the pages here where he really did some major changes, and I'll say why in a moment. But this is much more, this looks a lot more like later period Tintin. Just the way his head is drawn and the weight of the line and everything about it. So there's kind of a mix of different periods of the style of the art here. So as part of his investigation, Tintin signs on as a radio officer on board this this ship, the Speedle Star, and Thompson and Thompson are also coming on board. Typically, they like to dress up to go undercover on their investigations, and the way they dress up makes them stick out like a sore thumb. So they're here in their sailor outfits, very similar to their outfits that they wore in Red Rackham's Treasure, and they've got all their gear with them. And the other the deckhands are watching as they're coming aboard. And of course, down the steps, pratfall with all their stuff coming down on their heads. So, as I was saying, from this point on, a lot of the artwork was redrawn for the 1971 revision. And the reason for that, the reason why the British publisher wanted them to update the story is in the original, well, in the 1948 version, and in the original version, the ship is heading towards what was then the British Mandate of Palestine, which would later become the modern nation of Israel. And so when we get there, in the 1948 version, we see British soldiers walking around, and all of this was changed, and the location was reset into a fictional Gulf state, one of Hergé's fictional countries, called Hamed. and its capital city of Chemical. Even the outfit of this guy here is very, very much sort of like late period Tintin. He's got blue jeans on. Yeah, so when they come ashore here, or when they come into port, there's a police launch that comes out to the ship, and in the 48 version, these are British soldiers, and when Hergé redrew all of this, now we have Arab soldiers. You know, the officer in charge has sunglasses on. It's much more of a modern look to it. Hergé had his one of his main assistants at the time at Tintin magazine, Bob Damour, who would go on to be one of his major collaborators after Edgar P. Jacobs and Hergé had parted ways. He had him do a lot of research, and he went out to make sketches, reference sketches of an actual 1939 period tanker. So a lot of these backgrounds here are just really well researched. It's another sequence. So really nice cars here as well. This is a good volume for, you know, vehicles, automobiles. Really nice automobile drawings in here. This, and even the one at the earlier on here, the oil, or the auto cart executive. Yeah, I mean, you can tell the difference, you know. I mean, these drawings are really nice here, but there's a big difference. I mean, even the lack of detail in the background of this earlier period of drawing. And there's so much more going on in the backgrounds here. The street scene. So in the 48 version, Tintin is being escorted by British officers. Here he's being escorted by Arab officers, and some kidnappers come out and take him away. And in here, the kidnappers are men of a sheikh by the name of Bab el-Ar, who is sort of waging a rebellion against the emir of this country of Hamed. And they're under the impression that Tintin is an agent for an arms dealer, and that he has a delivery of arms for Bab el-Ar's investigation. There he is here. He's being told about him. And so they're ordered to go and to grab him from the soldiers. In the 48 version, he's kidnapped by Jewish terrorists, the Irgun gang, I think. So there's another thing that is, so the British publishers thought that readers in 1971 they just wouldn't be able to relate to these dated references. Which is kind of interesting, because when they went to release The Blue Lotus as an English language version in the early 80s, they didn't revise it out of its pre-World War II setting with what was going on with Japan and China at the time. They kept all of that political stuff intact. So it's interesting that they decided to take all of that historical stuff out of this. So part of the running humor in this volume is Thompson and Thompson, and they're in the desert. They're encountering mirages. First they see what looks like an oasis, and they realize that it's just a mirage. They think they see a city there. It's another mirage. They see a tree, and they say, oh, there's a third. They're really overdoing it. They're really overdoing it. They think it's another mirage, so they keep heading towards it, and of course, it's a real tree. This is such stupid humor. And then the next morning, they're off again, and they're really sweating and thirsty. They're dreaming of an oasis, and they finally come upon one. They said, "Oh, look, a lake. Why don't we have a swim?" That's a smashing idea. So they get into their old-fashioned swimming suits and they take a dive right into the sand. Another mirage. So in the original version from 1939, 1940, I guess, is when it stopped the original run. This is the point where that first version ended, where Tintin is sort of left to die by his abductors in the desert. There's another great sequence where they're still going on about mirages and arguing, is it a mirage? No, it's not. Look, another mirage. There you are, I told you so. So they go and they come across some Bedouin kneeling in prayer facing Mecca. And he says, "My poor fool, it's only a mirage. Any fool can tell it at a glance." No, I promise you it isn't. It isn't, eh? Very well, I'll prove it. He walks right over and he kicks them in the butt. And they chase them away with their knives. And then still later, they happen to come across a real pond. Thinking it's a mirage, they drive right into it. So in this sequence here, we're about to find out who the villain is, who is behind all the sabotage of the oil companies. And it's a really nice sequence here where Tintin comes up behind the leader of this gang that he sees blowing up an oil well or a pipeline, and he's getting out of his Bedouin gear and putting on some European clothes, and it turns out I know who that is. It's Dr. Muller. And Muller, as he's drawn here, is a little bit different than how he appeared in the Black Island. If you go back and you look at how he's drawn there, even in the updated version, he's not quite. He doesn't have quite as chiseled sort of a look as he does here. He's a little bit rounder and kind of gives the impression that he's a little fat. I think his hair he might not even be completely bald as he is here. He doesn't have the full beard. So he looks a little bit rougher here. It's another great sequence. Thompson and Thompson still in their Jeep, and they're driving along, and they come across some tracks. They think there's another vehicle, and so they decide to follow it. They think that it'll lead them out of the desert. And as they're going along, they see that it's joined by another set of tracks. And he said, "A real stroke of luck hitting this road. To be precise, we've really had a stroke." And then there, a third car joined the other two. We're on a very busy road. That makes the seventh a few hours later. We're obviously getting near a big town. And then they see, "What's that ahead of us?" He says, "It's a can of petrol. And a full one, too. That's lucky for us. At least not for the poor chap who lost it." He says, "I better check that ours is properly fixed. You can't be too careful." And they realize that theirs is gone. Goodness gracious. "Us too, we lost our petrol can. Look, the straps are broken. It must be somewhere behind us. Hurry up, we'll turn around. We must go back and look for it. I agree, petrol is too precious to lose." And so they turn around. not realizing, of course, that it's them who've been going around in circles, joining their own tracks, and that it's their own can of petrol that they found. Tintin, however, happens upon their trail, and he realizes what's going on. It's the same tracks, the same tires, and it's just somebody who's obviously lost and going around in circles, following his own tracks. And then a sandstorm starts brewing up. And in the sandstorm, Thompson and Thompson come upon Tintin. But before they can join together, they drive off, thinking that what they're hearing, Tintin calling after them, is just another mirage. And Tintin, of course, realizes that whoever it was is driving away from him. It's all over, Snowy. We're done for. Then finally, they think to turn around and go back. He hears them returning. He shoots off his gun, and they're able to meet each other. And this is another example of how the comedy just keeps going. It never stops. The jokes never stop. So they're driving along. They're out of the sandstorm now, and they look back, and Tintin is asleep in the back of the Jeep. And Thompson and Thompson start dozing off as well. So now they're they're still driving. He's got his foot on the pedal, but everybody's asleep now, zigzagging across the dunes, heading towards a city. It's a great panel of them driving their Jeep while asleep into a busy market. And then not only is it bad enough that they're driving into a market full of people, but they crash right through the wall of a mosque. And Thompson and Thompson are taken out by the police and thrown in jail. Nobody sees that Tintin is in the back. And so now we hear, or we see how Herr Muller is behind the plot. He's trying to coerce the Emir Ben Kalish Azab to sign a contract with his oil company. And meanwhile, he's behind all the sabotage that's going on the Emir's pipeline. So sort of a gangster tactics. And Tintin is waiting to see the Emir, and as he's waiting, he encounters Muller walking out. And here we meet, well, not only do we meet Ben Kalish Izab, who becomes, from this point on, he becomes one of the cast of Tintin's cast of characters in his world. He becomes another recurring character in later volumes. But more so than him is his son, who we shall meet very soon, Abdullah. And it turns out that someone has kidnapped Abdullah and is holding him for ransom and demands that he signs with the new oil company. And the note is signed by his rival, Bab El-Ar. And we begin to get a glimpse of what the Emir's son Abdullah is actually like. The Emir begins crying into his handkerchief. He begins sneezing. We find out that his son has put sneezing powder into his handkerchief. And when he's talking to his military advisor, offering him a cigar, the cigar explodes. Again, it's one of Abdullah's tricks. And as the Emir is laughing about it. You know, he tells people, you have to be a good sport about it. You can't be mad at him for these little tricks. And as he's doing so, his own cigarette explodes, and he says, "By the beard of the prophet, that wretched little centipede." Here we get our first glimpse of Abdullah, and another one of his practical jokes: a spider on a spring popping out of a matchbox. and now we meet another return character. So this is the salesman, the traveling salesman from Lisbon, Oliveira de Figueira, and we saw him last in Cigars of the Pharaoh. And since this is set in the Arab world, Hergé decides to bring him back. And Oliveira helps Tintin figure out how to get inside Dr. Muller's sort of mountain fortress that he has. So he decides to disguise himself as Oliveira's nephew, and during one of his visits he brings him along so that Tintin can then sneak around and do some investigating. And here we have some sneezing powders. Dr. Muller is trying to swat a wasp. He knocks over a box of sneezing powder that Abdullah has left. He finds Tintin. His disguise is revealed. And then he finds his way down into a series of underground tunnels. Again, it's very much like Cigars of the Pharaoh here with the underground tunnels. And then he finally finds where Abdullah is being held hostage. And as he tries to get him to come with him, Abdullah is not a cooperative hostage. So he won't go at first. And Tintin decides to talk to him more sternly. "Abdullah, come along, Abdullah. This isn't time to play about." And he opens the door and sprays Tintin with a seltzer bottle. So, yeah, very, very difficult to try to rescue this boy. He bites him in the hand as he's trying to tell him to be quiet. He's screaming instead. And then finally, who comes to the rescue? But it's Captain Haddock, who sort of appears out of nowhere. He comes to Tintin's rescue, and he doesn't have time to tell him how he has come to be here and to appear at the right time to rescue Tintin. We find that Dr. Muller has taken Abdullah with him, and so we're off on another chase. Really nice car here. So we have an auto chase in the desert, and of course Abdullah is plaguing Dr. Muller as he's trying to get the two of them away. He put some itching powder down his back, causing him to wreck. And Captain Haddock gets a taste of Abdullah as well. He throws sand in his face. This is the beginning of a very contentious relationship between Captain Haddock and Abdullah. He becomes quite a plague for him every time he makes an appearance. And this is sort of a grim sequence here where Muller has run out of options and he decides that he's going to take his own life. And we don't really see him ever put the gun to his head. Hergé wouldn't show something like that. but it's suggested we know what he's going to do. Tintin says, "Don't do it in heaven's name," and then we see what has happened, that it's a trick gun that Abdullah has switched, which shoots ink. And so he's shot himself in the head with black ink. And here we see Abdullah's nickname for Captain Haddock, by which he'll refer to him always. He calls them blistering barnacles. And as we end here, the Thompsons come upon what looks like an aspirin tube of aspirin on the ground, and they're both complaining of splitting headaches from driving in the sun. So they pop the pills, and whatever was in those pills is not aspirin, begins to take effect. With very, very strange and bizarre results. And so we have here the cover illustration as Tintin is driving Dr. Muller, the ink-stained Dr. Muller, and Thompson back, and once they get to the hospital, they're in quite a state. And so all is well. As it ends here, Abdullah is reunited with his father, the Emir, and at the end of the story, Haddock gets a letter from Calculus. So we hear from Calculus by way of this letter. Calculus has analyzed the pills that Thompson have swallowed, and he has found out that this is the chemical that they've been adding to the petrol, causing it to explode. And included is he sent a photograph of Marlin Spike Hall, showing the condition that Marlin Spike Hall is in now that he's concluded his experiments. And as for Thompson, Calculus has created an antidote which should relieve them of the symptoms that they're experiencing for having swallowed the capsules. We see them recovering in the hospital there. And as we end, Captain Haddock is enjoying one of the Emir's cigars. We see Abdullah peeking in the window just as the cigar explodes in his face. A very fitting end to the story. So that was The Land of Black Gold. And in our next episode, we'll take a look at the third of the two-parters, which begins with Destination Moon. Thank you for watching.